Yeah, that seems a little bit better.
Can you hear me now? Folks on Zoom, can you hear me? Thumbs up. Here we are. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the 2021 HistoryMaker Awards.
Thank you.
I'm the History Project's Executive Director. I get to play MC in person here tonight for the first time in almost 2 years, year and a half. So it is absolutely my pleasure to see so many of you here, to know that there are folks joining us from all over the place on Zoom on our very high-tech hybrid event platform here. And I just want to acknowledge it's been a really hard year and a half for all of us. The last time I got to stand in front of an audience was at our Pink Tea, which took place on Leap Day, about 2 weeks before we shut down in 2020. So to see so many of you here tonight and to make new friends and see new faces and get to see people who I've only got to see online is just such a pleasure. I do want to hold some space because it has been such a difficult year and a half for those of us who can't be here to celebrate with us tonight. In particular, I wanted to call out the names of Jahaira DeAlto, trans activist, and our longtime bookkeeper, Rob Valentine, who just passed away. So let's take a quick moment of silence to reflect on those who can't be be here with us to celebrate. Thank you. So this is our 12th HistoryMaker Awards. We began to present these awards back in 2009, and we started them because we felt that activists in our LGBTQ community deserved recognition and gratitude. History is not just about the past, but what we do as part of the LGBTQ community every day. We know that gay history began before Stonewall and will continue long after we are gone. And it is important to honor and acknowledge those who came before us and to educate those yet to come by preserving, protecting, and sharing our history. Despite our archives being closed for most of 2020 and 2021, with your support, the History Project has had a very busy 2 years. We've held over 40 virtual events, sharing LGBTQ history with thousands of people around the world. We've partnered with organizations in the Boston area to share unique histories and stories, and we've continued our efforts to document Boston's queer communities of color with the support of fellows Micah Broadnax and Slandy Princeton. Although the archives is only open intermittently at this point, we've saved records, books, photographs, and recordings documenting topics including drag in Provincetown, music at the 1270, Kristen Porter's Dyke Nights, rare 1970s pornography. It's my favorite too. And an enormous collection of 1990s lesbian paperbacks. All of these records tell the stories of our community. We could not have done it without you. I want to say that while most of our collections are physical, tangible objects, the last 2 years has proven that when we come together, whether that's virtually or in person, that's when LGBTQ history comes alive. Our work, our efforts to document, preserve, and share our community's powerful and complex history can only happen with your financial support and the support of our community. At the end of tonight's program, you'll have the opportunity to make an additional donation to the History Project, and I hope that the stories that you'll hear tonight will inspire you to keep supporting our work. So, it's my distinct pleasure to give tonight's Lavender Rhino Award to Tre'Andre Valentine, and my sad job to say that Tre'Andre is under the weather and could not be here with us in person this evening. But he did the very responsible thing and called out, and his roommate is making him soup. So we're thinking of you, Tre'Andre, and we hope that you feel better soon. In lieu of his being here, I wanted to share a couple words about all the work that Tre'Andre has done. Tre'Andre is the executive director of the Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition. He serves on the boards of Y2Y and Trans Resistance. His impact on Boston's queer and trans community is unsurpassed. From his efforts to organize trans, non-binary, and gender-expansive people to empower and advocate for themselves through building trans leadership, to his advocacy for equity and equal access at all levels and all intersections of identity, especially for trans and queer people of color. Congratulations, Tre'Andre. I hope you feel better soon. And I'm really excited to see where your work takes you and its impact on the Boston area. So let's all give a round of applause to Fiona. Introduce the chair of my board of directors, Andrew Elder. Andrew.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Thank you, Joan. So I'd like to say a few thank yous to those who made tonight possible. First, to our planning committee, Micah Broadnax, Carissa Cunningham, Ben Federlin, Tony Grima, and Anna Kosova. Thank you. I have been involved in planning this event for the past 12 years, and I didn't do anything this year. and it's amazing. Beautiful and wonderful. So I know what they're experiencing, and they did so much wonderful work to make tonight happen. I also want to thank our fabulous virtual host, Steve Dyer, and our extraordinary photographer, Matt Kurkowski. Thank you. I also want to thank the 2021 host committee for their support. If you're in the room and you want to give us a wave, it'd be great. Kevin Hepner, Libby Bouvier and Andrea Devine, Pat Kazemba and Karen Kahn, Neil Kane and Charles Schoonmaker, Russ Lopez and Andrew Sherman, Anderson Clark, Jose Ricardo McFadden Figueroa, Tony Grima and Peter Muse, Jonah Lacqua and Sarah Marina, Rob Johnson, Marvin Kabikoff, Stephen Nonak, Martha Stone, and Jessica Taylor. Thank you all so much for your support. I'd also like to thank tonight's sponsors, GLAD, GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders, Eastern Bank, and Boston University School of Law. Thank you all so much for making tonight. I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge my fellow board members. It's a real pleasure getting to work with you all, and it's been a bright spot for me throughout the pandemic, and I hope it's been for you a little bit. Libby Bouvier, Jonathan Chu, Tony Grima, Marvin Kabikoff, Neil Kane, Mark Crone, Russ Lopez, and Jessica Taylor. If you're here tonight in person or on Zoom, wave a hand and take a bow. Thank you so much for everything. So throughout the pandemic, we've been fortunate to have been supported by Mass Humanities, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, the Boston Foundation, and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. In order to continue our work as this funding comes to a close, though, we need your help to keep the lights on, to maintain staffing, and to continue our essential work to document and share LGBTQ history. To that end, I can't say enough about Joan's amazing work over the past 2 years. Thanks to funding from the Mellon Foundation, we hired Joan in January 2020 as our inaugural executive director. I can honestly say I don't know where we'd be without her. Weird. During an unprecedented period in all of our lives, she's shown herself to be a thoughtful and courageous leader and a fierce advocate for the History Project's values and mission. We need your donations tonight to help keep Joan in her role as executive director. During this challenging year, she managed to transform the History Project in powerful and profound ways. So please join me in thanking her for everything she's done.
Andrew's crying, I'm gonna cry. We haven't even heard from John Ward yet.
He's gonna cry too.
He's gonna cry. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much. It's now my pleasure to introduce John Ward, our 2021 History Maker. When I started showing up at the History Project, which was, I think, in 2013, but it's been a very long pandemic, I was a young, under LGBTQ educated graduate student. And I was really struck by the stories of those who purposefully came out. They came out in service of the burgeoning LGBTQ community, who through their activism and support, put a target on themselves to make the world a better place for us all. John Ward graduated from BU Law in 1976. And in 1977 became Boston's first openly gay male attorney. In 1977, there was no law prohibiting discrimination against gay people in housing, employment, credit, or public accommodations. To be openly gay was to be a target for harassment, estrangement, or violence. John founded GLAAD in 1978. After undercover police targeted, entrapped, and arrested gay patrons of the Boston Public Library. GLAAD's first case charging the BPL and police with violating the civil rights of a man arrested in the library ended in a settlement. John continued his work with GLAAD through the 80s and 90s, and in 1995, he was the first openly gay male lawyer to argue in front of the United States Supreme Court. Versus Irish American Gay Lesbian Bisexual Group of Boston, a case that fought for the right of LGBTQ people to participate in South Boston's St. Patrick's Day Parade. And I think, did it take until 2015? 2015, 2016, 27, who knows? It took a very long time for that to work. John has fought for LGBTQ rights throughout his career, and GLAAD brought marriage equality to Massachusetts in 2004 and the United States in 2015. John, for your lifetime of contribution to our community's safety, rights, and equality, it is my honor to present you with the 2021 HistoryMaker Awards.
Well, hi, everybody. I promised myself that I would try not to pontificate and not to cry. I have a pretty good handle on it first. I'm not sure about the second, so bear with me. I want to begin, of course, with thanks to the sponsors of this event, particularly GLAAD, our love child that's grown up, and to BU Law School and Dean Angela, who've been so welcoming and so supportive. And just a little. So, and just a little bit of shameless self-promotion. I'm going to teach a course here in January. And the LGBTQ movement. And so, if you know anybody that's looking for something to do, that's going to be law school. Who else do I need to thank? I need to thank my brother and his wife, my husband, and a lot of you folks that are here helped grow GLAAD and from a seedling to basically the group that more than anybody else, I think, gave us marriage equality, Mary Donato, and her brilliant performance before the Supreme Court in the Obergefell case. So there's, and I'm probably going to forget lots of people. I'd like to say a few words about this lifelong process called coming out. And it's kind of, for me, it's kind of in two parts. There's part one and part two. Part one is kind of easy. It's a story I've told a bunch of times. I could do it, without tears. And it sounds kind of dramatic, and actually it was. I was in my late 20s, I was 27, and I had a very, very bad case of alcoholism, drug and amphetamine addiction. Probably shame, deep shame of my sexual orientation was a significant cofactor. I was at the end jobless, homeless, and finally threw in the sponge and called my father, whom I hadn't spoken to in a couple of years, and he just said, "Come home." No tears. But and he my brother greeted me when I was living in Brooklyn, and I had no money, so I went to these bookies that I knew, and they gave me $10 to buy a bus ticket. And they said, if we found out you used it on booze, we'll chop your legs. So I somehow and we got up there, and my dad had been in a rehabilitation center for alcoholics in New Jersey and had gotten well. And he took me down there, and they kept me for 8.5 months. Most of it free service, what they charmingly, charitably called a scholarship. I was a smart kid, so I had scholarships before. This was, it's sort of different. What they told me was, if you're gonna make it, you've got to embrace this word that you hate called alcoholic, and you have to apply it to yourself and take it in. And that was tough, but I got my head around that. And then while I was there, a very wise psychiatrist said, well, there's another hated word that you've got to swallow, that awful, dreadful clinical term, homosexual. You've got to. So because I didn't really have many options, and my back was against the wall, and I had the grace to know it, I signed on for both of those tasks. And it actually, once my willingness was there, the wind was suddenly kind of behind my sails. These words that I thought were death sentences became the doors to freedom. It wasn't a day at the beach, but it actually, and it was a process, but it wasn't really that hard. Part of the reason was that the times were right. I mean, when all this was happening to me in 1970, there was the African American freedom movement. There was the American Indian movement had just started. There was feminism, a wave of feminism in full flower. There was gay liberation was beginning. Stonewall happened. They're just everywhere you looked, there were, the buzz of change was happening. In Boston, where I came after I was released from the drug farm, or rehabilitation center, as we call it, was a hotbed of activism. There were dances at the Charles Street Meeting House, and there was the homophile community health service and gay community news. There, and it was just a time where one didn't feel alone. And it wasn't my plan to become an openly gay lawyer. I wanted to get a kind of a do-good job with the federal government, just kind of keep a low profile. But I just didn't get hired. And at the same time, I read in The Advocate about this man in Los Angeles, Tom Coleman, who had hung out a shingle as an openly gay lawyer. And I went out to see him, and he was very encouraging. He said, John, last year I had $6,000 in fees, and this year it's $12,000, and you can do it, and blah, blah, blah. So I came back to Boston, and actually it was me and 2 other guys, Andy Weiss and Bill Anderson. We put an ad in the Phoenix and one in Gay Community News saying serving our community, and that's how we came out. Well, the partnership didn't last, but I stayed there at 2 Park Square for $300 a month rent. And, it was not the Park Square that you see today. It was something a little different. And coincidentally, this was election year. I think Garrett Byrne was running for re-election as district attorney. And so, surprise, surprise, the cops were beating on one of their favorite targets, gay men. And what was a little different was this time the community fought back. Okay, lesbians, gay men fought back and organized protests, and it just seemed like the next right thing to do was to fill out this form applying for nonprofit status for this group called Park Square Advocates, doing business as gay and lesbian advocates and defenders. We had to have the Park Square Advocates so people could write checks because they don't want to, And so a board of directors showed up, a lot of wonderful, mostly radical people, and we got going. And for a while, it was the kind of a wholly owned subsidiary of John Ward Enterprises. But then people with sustaining energy came along, some of whom are in this room today, and some of whom are listening on Zoom. And there's so many I could thank individually. The ones that most come to mind are Gary Busick and Steve Van Solvehaar. They were the guys down the hall. And also there was Tony Windsor and the people from Mass Law Reform upstairs and other people in the building were supportive, so I wasn't. Mike Avery, who shared office space with me, went to court. One of my first cases was suing the DA. That was just so terrifying. I was a little terrified about coming here tonight, but I got over it. I actually felt greeted by all this love. But anyhow, Mike came with me to I swore I wasn't going to tell war stories, but here you get going. The first assistant DA had called me up the night before we were going to court and called me honey on the phone. So I was scared, and so Mike came with me. And then afterwards, he met Gaffney. His name was John Gaffney, in the elevator. And Gaffney says to him, "I saw you were with John Ward. Are you one of those guys too?" And Mike said, "Well, my sexuality is really my own business, but I should tell you, I don't date DAs." So it's wonderful when yes, there were defeats, and yes, there were, but it was like, it just was going to work, and I kind of knew it. And the wind, as I say, was behind me, and it was easy. And that's part one, okay? Part two is a work in progress. It's flash forward 4 decades when I think it's no exaggeration to say that we're facing some headwinds. I'm one of those people that wakes up regularly at 3 in the morning and thinks about that the planet seems to have AIDS, that the thugs are at the door and knocking hard, that as Yeats said, the best are, what did he say? I have to write it down somewhere. When you get to be my age, you forget things. He said,
"The best lack all conviction, and the worst are filled with."
Thank you very much. Yes, the best lack all conviction, and the worst are filled with passion and intensity. And and it's easy to freak out, and it's easy to hide, and it's easy to try to look for some kind of spiritual. And it's probably Jeff Bezos or something. It's easy to try to find a spiritual bypass, just go airy fairy, whatever. I don't want to stay there. And so one of the things I've been thinking about, is what is it that maybe the initial experience of coming out has that could teach me and maybe some other people something useful today. And the way that I think about coming out is quite different from what it was back then. I think about it now as a deeply held conviction that another world is possible, and a passionate, almost erotic desire for that possibility to actualize itself. And I learned in coming out part one that inner work does lead to outer action that can be useful, okay? And I'm kind of wondering if that's, and I actually believe that that's still true today, that you can cultivate that vision, that it takes work, that it takes determination, that it takes a daily practice of some kind to keep it going. But the alternatives, I really am pain aversive. And, I've discovered through sad experience that ambient doesn't work at 3 a.m. as a long-term solution. Maybe it does for some people, God bless you, but for me, no. I tried the prescription, anyhow, but I do, at this stage of my life, I have the luxury to try to cultivate that way of being in the world. I have time in the morning to meditate, to look for beautiful poems and send them out to people, to walk my dog, to look at birds and kids and trees, and to try to really pay attention to what's to the reality that's in front of me. And I think, as I say, that has to have to be really powerful and to really be a phase changer. It has to be grounded in something like erotic love. You know, when I think about the kids that sat in at lunch counters and the freedom riders and people like that, the people that stood up at Stonewall, the people, yes, they were angry and yes, they had enough, but I believe that they also had a lot of love, okay? And I know that, you know, some people are gonna tune out when I say that, but this is my experience and this is what I try to, this is the place where I try to wind up. I've tried just about everything else as a response to come up short. So let me take a look at my notes, because I'm sure I have a lot of really good things to say that I forgot. Oh yeah. And I find that as I've done my best to embrace that and surrender to it, that decent work in the world kind of comes my way. You know, the legal work that I do now, they passed some new progressive laws in California that give long-term prisoners a chance to get out. Not because they're totally innocent, but because they've been hit too hard for too many years. And so I can do some work at a distance helping them with their appeals. There's a program at the Nashua Street Jail to help people get their GED, and I can do that on Zoom. It's not exactly directly destroying the prison industrial complex, but it helps, you know, I mean, it doesn't hurt. I've been offered by my alma mater this wonderful opportunity to teach, and next semester maybe I could learn something doing that, you know. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think it's important to understand that there isn't really a separation between inner work and outer work, you know. And I guess the only other thing I want to say is that I can't speak for those whose life is a daily struggle to make $1 out of 85 cents, or for people who the experience of walking in the world feels perilous and dangerous on a daily basis because of the color of their skin or their sexual orientation or their gender identity or their I just want to mention one thing. There's a couple of women in the room that I won't embarrass them by identifying them, that years and years ago, before all of this stuff about gay marriage and everything else, they came to me and said, we want to get married. This was in the 70s, okay? This is the last war story, I swear Christ, that I'll tell you. And I said, you know, I was like young and stupid and felt a little bit omnipotent, or a bit like the Wizard of Oz. So I prepared all these documents and wrote to them and prepared them, and they signed them, and I took them in front of this kind of mildly disturbed judge for a name change, and she granted it. And I met them at a glad party, but 20 years later, they said, you know, we're still together. And won't cry. But in a way, it was kind of like maybe the best thing I ever did as a lawyer. You know, I mean, it's just weird how it goes. So, there's so many other words I could do, but I'm not gonna. What I'm gonna do instead is read you a few lines from a poem I came across yesterday by a Polish poet. I had to look up how to pronounce his name, and the best I can come up with is Czesław Miłosz. And the poem is called Late Ripeness, which he wrote when he was approaching 90. And I'm now, I mean, I love to say this, I'm pushing 80. And so, I mean, you know, it's never too late. And I guess the other thing, the final thing I want to say about coming out is viewed that way, view as coming out of the trance, out of letting go of the prison of the dominant paradigm, is something for everybody, I think. It'd be a good idea if anybody, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, might give it a try. So here's what Keshla says in the late writers. He says, "I knew always that I would be a worker in the vineyard, as are all men and women living at the same time, whether they are aware of it or not." And so I leave you with those words, and I thank you very, very much.
For those of you on Zoom, there was a standing ovation. Stand up and hold. Thank you, John. Thank you so much for your words and for your work. And I put the award up there so we don't break it. Between you and I, we're not going to break it.
Last year, so I won't forget it.
Yeah, no, we'll make sure you bring it home too.
Did I thank
You did. John, thank you so much. Thank you, John. We have one final speaker tonight, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to Susan Ryan-Fulmer. Susan's a journalist, a media advocate, and our 2016 HistoryMaker honoree, and she has some parting words for you.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Yeah. Excellent, that's good. I apologize for the phone incident a little bit earlier. I was trying to turn it off. Do the exact opposite. So first I just want to congratulate Tre'Andre and John, the inspiring work they do and continue to do. And it is such an honor to me to be a part of this program. Phone needs to die. Maybe you guys didn't hear it. Okay, all right. All right, so I was asked to talk about the importance of history. So let's start with a little exercise. Raise your hand if you've heard of Heather Cox Richardson. Seriously? I thought everyone would raise their hand. All right, well, okay. John, thank you for raising both hands. All right, Heather Cox Richardson, she's like a celebrity historian, which has become a thing. During Trump's first impeachment hearing, she started writing little summaries of what was going on. This was in 2019. Her Facebook followers soon grew to 1.5 million people. She now still publishes her little newsletter on Substack, which brings in $1 million a year, which she has used to hire researchers to help her, because not only is she a professor of history at Boston College, specializing in the Civil War, Reconstruction era, she's continuing to write her daily missives, which millions of readers, and now co-hosts a very popular podcast on history called Here and Now. And she's not alone. There are a lot of celebrity historians out there now. Fiona Hill, with whom we all met again through Trump's first impeachment hearing. She holds a PhD in history from Harvard, and she parlayed her knowledge of Russia and Russian into a career in diplomacy. And her testimony, which was brilliant, was immediately memed across Twitter. And she's just written a book, a memoir, that was blurred by another celebrity historian, Timothy Snyder, who, if you don't recognize the name, I'm sure you know his little snack of a book, 20 Lessons from the 21st Century, which got a lot of distraught political junkies through some of the Trump years, because that book was a nice, short, actionable list of things that you could do on a daily basis to keep the country from slipping into authoritarianism. It ranged from don't obey bad things, defend institutions, and make eye contact. Trying to make eye contact with them. And there's so many more. There's I've lost my place. Nicole Hannah-Jones, technically a journalist, but she oversaw just a brilliant project, 1619 project. Yuval Noah Harari, author of *Sapiens*. He was interviewed by Anderson Cooper last week on 60 Minutes. Since when does this happen to historians? I feel compelled to note that both Anderson Cooper and Yuval are gay. So we're living in a moment in which it's obvious to us that if you want to understand what we're living through, you really need to understand history. And that's not just true for national politics. It applies to local politics. And if you want to understand what's going on here in Boston with Boston Pride, you need to understand history. Out of all the media coverage, press releases and organizational statements issued in response to the news that Boston Pride's board of directors had dissolved the organization, my favorite, bar none, was the one sent out by the History Project, and I need to quote from it right now. The favorite line, quote, "The current iteration of Boston Pride was formed in the early 2000s after scandal left the previous Pride organization in shambles." Shambles is an underused word, my friends, underused. All right, the statement goes on to note the various controversies that have engulfed Boston Pride over the years. 1973 and 74, whether to allow drag queen performers to participate. 1979, how to address the needs of people of color. 1989, whether to include bisexual in the official name. To these controversies, I'd add one more. And gosh, my source, I'm not gonna say who my source is for this, because like, what if I'm wrong? What if he lied to me? I don't think he did. He's a former member of the Gay Liberation Front. Anyway, the very first Pride March in Boston, 1971, it was preceded by a week of like political panel discussions on legal rights, religion, police treatment of gay people. And yet this focus on politics was seen as a frivolous exercise by a lot of gay activists. The singular focus on commemorating the Stonewall Inn riots alienated and annoyed members of the Gay Liberation Front, the Fag Rag Collective, who thought that gay pride should also focus on ending the Vietnam War, which these activists saw as racist genocide. So from the very beginning, Pride was a place for serious arguments about the intersection of race, politics, and sexuality. This is not taught in our schools. Our kids don't know any of this. I think it's a crisis for our community. My youngest daughter came out in middle school. Now she's a high school senior, co-president of her high school GSA. Newsflash to people who remember GSA as Gay Straight Alliance. It is now the Gender Sexuality Alliance, in case you ever come across the need to know that information. And we frequently talk about gay history, and she learns a lot from me. And she's always saying, how are gay people supposed to learn this stuff? In September, at the start of the school year, there were like 60 kids in this GSA. I am not making that up. She's really annoyed with the baby gays. The baby gays are 9th graders. They're the 9th graders, and they did not know who Harvey Milk, Marsha P. Johnson, or Sylvia Rivera. She's not happy about that. So the collection and preservation of LGBTQIA+ history, it's deeply important work. It's also an act of altruism because, you know, the History Project volunteers and staff who, you know, you may take pleasure in the collection and preservation of queer history, but you're unlikely to ever meet the people that you're benefiting because a lot of them haven't been born yet. It is truly a selfless act, and it's an act of altruism. So I just want to give a lot of thanks and gratitude to the visionary historians and archivists who founded the History Project over 30 years ago. 40. I'm not good at math. And who keep the organization going today. The work you do is so important and it matters.
Thank you so much, Susan. I didn't expect that Pride statement to be quoted from.
Fabulous.
Thank you. It was on in the board of directors and a fit of pique. Very annoyed with how Boston Pride went down, but we can talk about that after the program's over, everyone. Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you to everyone here for celebrating with us tonight, for coming out here to the St. Botolph Club, for coming online to spend some time with us. If you are interested in learning more about what we do, I encourage you to seek out any of our volunteers, staff, or board members who are here in the audience. There are lots of us here tonight. We are a grassroots organization. We measure our success by our capacity to engage with our community. So if you'd like to make a gift of any size is incredibly welcome, and the act of giving matters just as much as the amount you give. So if you'd like to donate, we do have volunteers ready. Just head out toward the registration table. We'll take care of you. And that's my whole plug. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Okay. All right, gotta unpin this. Okay, so everyone else who's on the Zoom, I'm just, for people who joined late, I'm Steve. I'm good friends with Joan. Very happy to be this liminal person between the internet and the people in that room. So just personally, I should have shut off my camera. I was crying. So anyone who came up with John, just thanks for all of your work. It's really special work that he's done, that the Mass Trans Political Coalition's done as well. And thanks so much for joining and supporting the History Project. It's, like I said, the speeches, connecting with this history that's happening right now is really important to me to be able to hear these stories to make my life possible. So I hope you enjoyed the program. I gotta go walk this off. I'm still really emotional, but really terrific. And we will see you at one of our next events. So thank you all for joining. Again, this is also recorded. If you wanted to go back to it, we'll send it out later. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks so much for hosting us, Stephen.
Of course.